Good afternoon. So to begin, for those investors who are just tuning in, could you give us a brief overview of your company, Treasury Metals?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to, Amy. My name's Greg Ferron. I'm Vice President of Corporate Development. I've been with the company for 5 years now, so I've seen the full transition from an exploration company into a development stage company. And we're presently developing the Goliath Gold Project. It's in northwestern Ontario. We're permitting for about an 80 to 100,000 ounce gold producer. It's an open pit. It's got a very attractive grade of about 2.5 grams. And the project enjoys excellent infrastructure. We're located about 2 kilometers from the Trans-Canada Highway. And because of that, we enjoy excellent infrastructure. So access to power is all available, paved roads, natural gas, skilled labor is nearby. So it's an ideal situation to have a gold project.
Okay, great. Okay, so for those who don't know, could you summarize your environmental policies and guidelines going into production? For example, what are some of the main environmental concerns and how do you propose to eliminate or curb this effect?
Yeah, sure. Well, because we're operating in one of the world's best jurisdictions for gold mining, Ontario, Canada, there's a number of gold mines operating today. I think there's somewhere around the total of about 20 operating gold mines. So there is quite an onerous, rigorous process to permit a mine, and we're well advanced in that process. We're dealing with both the federal and the provincial government, as well as the local communities, including the First Nations and Aboriginal. So they're concerned it's a real balance between creating jobs, and we're in an ideal location. There are no significant environmental risks for this project. There's no immediate water issues, but that's really what they're concerned about, is balancing jobs, the economy, and then taking care of their environment. So we've completed about 20,000 page environmental document on the project, trying to mitigate any potential risks that could be caused from the project in terms of noise or potential impact on the local water. So all that's been mitigated, and that's all advancing quite well through the permit process.
Okay, so on a more macro level, what are your expectations about the gold market in the future?
Yeah, well, the one thing I do watch very closely is it's my opinion that you're starting to see a broader diversification from the financial players, so investment advisors, institutions, governments diversifying their investments into gold. So I'm sure they'll continue with equities and bonds and currencies, but I think you're going to see a wider amount of capital flow into the gold sector. So that's really what I'm watching. Mm-hmm. And a good example of that is the GLD, mm-hmm. the SPDR. It's the world's largest, or one of the world's largest ETFs. It's a gold bullion ETF. And this week alone, you've seen about 20 tons of new capital deployed. So that's a significant amount of gold mm-hmm. acquired by one ETF mm-hmm. This week alone. And the other things I look for is, mine supply and demand. Gold isn't like other commodities like oil or iron ore. When there's increased demand, you can just increase the supply. It's very difficult to do that mm-hmm. for the gold sector. And then, of course, there's other things we look for, some of the macro environments, geopolitical things happening with the Italian banks, for example, right now, and what's just happened in Britain, mm-hmm. and the negative interest rates. All those are going to drive demand for gold.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to your company's leading project, the Goliath Gold Project. Could you give us more information about the development stage and the next catalysts that investors should be keeping an eye on for 2016?
Yeah, sure. The 2 catalysts are receiving the mine permits, mm-hmm. and we're back drilling at the project, trying to expand the size of the resource and increase the overall confidence for potential production. So the mine permits, we're probably 2/3 through that process. We're expecting to have the permit next year, and that'll be to build an open pit and a mill facility and a tailings facility for about 80 to 100,000 ounces a year, both open pit and underground, and at a very attractive grade of about 2.5 to 3 grams in the open pit, and then eventually you would move underground. And the second thing is more drilling. I'm quite excited this year. We're going to be drilling outside the resource. Now the equity markets are opening up for the gold sector. There's more capital available. We're able to allocate funds to drill and expand the size of the resource outside the known resource area, which in the past few years we really focused on drilling off the resource to create a reserve for the first 12 years of mine life.
Okay, so this pertains to what you've already mentioned, but what are some of the more unique technical steps, would you say, that were taken in this exploration phase of the project compared to what other companies may be doing?
Okay. Well, I mean, the one thing we did that was quite interesting is when Teck Cominco made the discovery on the project years ago. In the main zone, what we did is to reduce the capital. We drilled through some of their previous drilled holes, and we just extended those, and we hit a new zone called the C zone, which comes to surface and is open at depth as well. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of an inexpensive, unique way to expand the resource by doing that. And then also we've been doing a lot of work the past few years trying to keep the costs down, is developing a program mm-hmm. of where there's interesting targets where mm-hmm. we think we can expand the resource. Mm-hmm. So now that the markets are more favorable towards gold, mm-hmm. we're going to go out and drill those targets. Mm-hmm. So that's quite interesting as well.
Okay, great. So in addition to the drilling technique that you mentioned, what do you think are some of the competitive advantages that Treasury Metal possesses over other junior mining companies?
Yeah, well, definitely the number one benefit we have is mm-hmm. infrastructure, mm-hmm. and on top of that is being in Ontario. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine having direct access to power, both mm-hmm. natural gas and hydro, mm-hmm. paved roads, mm-hmm. rail, the Trans-Canada Highway, a town 15 kilometers nearby. That's going to reduce the cost to not only build the mine, but to operate the mine. Mm-hmm. So that's significant. It's mm-hmm. I recently took a group up from Asia. It's a gold and zinc producer, and they're used to operating mines in China and Africa, and they just could not believe the infrastructure, the advantage you have of being at a mine like this. On top of that, we're in a great jurisdiction mm-hmm. in Ontario. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is the grade mm-hmm. of the project is quite high for Ontario. Mm-hmm. And third is the management and board, quite mm-hmm. experienced in terms of developing these projects and also selling projects as well.
Okay. So I noticed that Treasury Metals has made several private placements in the past. Are there any financing plans for Treasury Metals in the near future? And if so, could you provide some insight into how the company plans to allocate these resources once successfully closed, of course?
Sure. Well, the last financing we closed was a sort of a traditional financing with a Canadian brokerage firm mm-hmm. called Haywood, and that really positioned us to continue this next program of permitting and drilling. So we are funded at this time. So we're unlikely to go back to the traditional markets to raise more capital. You know, we will need to do one more round of financing prior to completion of the feasibility and permits. But what we're looking now is more strategic type capital. So like a gold producer, for example, would be where we'd get the next round of capital, like a 10% mm-hmm. stake.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there any additional points you'd like to share with potential investors that we've yet to cover in this time?
Yeah, and one thing that's quite interesting about our company is, we do trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol TML. Mm-hmm. What's unusual about our company is our shareholder base. Not only do insiders have a large interest, about 15% of the company is owned by insiders. We've got a very large European loyal shareholder base. About 50% of our shares are owned out of Switzerland and Germany, and they've been long-term supporters. So I think that's a great benefit to us. Mm-hmm. That's something that most investors probably wouldn't know mm-hmm. about.
All right. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.